Tim Walz, I mean, for goodness sakes, $1 billion in fraud? How does that happen under his watch? What a governor. What a governor he is. I'll tell you, this is not looking good. I mean, when the New York Times deserts you, Timmy boy, and they're like, this is bad. And they do a giant expose. And all they can really say is like, this is really bad. Prosecutors say members of the Somali, I don't know, you can call them quasi-mafia, right? A group with growing political power were largely responsible for this. And President Trump has drawn national attention to the scandal amid his crackdown on immigration. Of course, it was devastating what we learned. An Afghan refugee who came here who had worked with our intel ops and with our military in Afghanistan was the one responsible for gunning down the National Guard members and killing one of them, 20 years old, her whole life ahead of her. So yes, Donald Trump has said, listen, we don't need any more headaches. And he's making a big deal out of Minnesota. Meanwhile, Tim Walz is trying to say like, this is not a big deal. I'm sorry, it's $1 billion. How is this not a big deal? Let's go to Caroline Levitt moments ago there at the White House talking about this very issue.
Law-abiding American citizens. In fact, according to a new Bombshell report from the New York Times, Somalian migrants in Minnesota have defrauded nearly $1 billion in taxpayer-funded benefits under Democrat Governor Walz's leadership. President Trump is putting an end to this dangerous America Last approach. His position is rooted in common sense. In the wake of last week's atrocity.
Yes. It is common sense, right? I mean, common sense, for goodness sakes. Even the New York Times, as I said, has common sense on this one. But he's out there deflecting, trying to say, oh, this is somehow a race issue? Excuse me? Like, you're not allowed to call out $1 billion in fraud? You're not allowed to, because this is Ilhan Omar's territory? They're a protected class? I don't think so. I don't, Timmy.
Well, speaking of the Somali community, President Trump is targeting them and your state in part. He's citing fraud as the reason for his crackdown. Dozens of people of East African descent have been charged, convicted, and sentenced for stealing more than $1 billion in taxpayer money from government programs during COVID. As you know, Governor, that is more than Minnesota spends each year to run its Department of Corrections. So I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated.
Really well run. You lose $1 billion, buddy boy.
But that attracts criminals. There's a reason Minnesota ranks as the top. Lowest childhood poverty, best place for children to live.
Oh my gosh. By the way, when you look at the New York Times story, and I can go through this with you, what were they actually doing? They were taking and stealing the money from the kids that deserved it and needed it. Yeah, I mean, this is a bunch of phony you-know-whats.
People are taking advantage of that. They're going to prison. That is totally disconnected with demonizing an entire group of people who came here fleeing civil war and created a vibrant community that makes Minnesota and this country better. But that's Donald Trump. Deflect, demonize, come up with no solutions. He's not going to help fix anything on fraud. Oh
my gosh. So now it's like somehow racist of you to even say any of this stuff. I'm sorry, like that is not that. Of course, that's what they do, right? Like that's straight out of their playbook. You know, when in doubt, just call them a racist, and there you go. But this is the New York Times story. Okay, there it is, Timmy boy. I don't know what to tell you. And when I look at the details of this, I see that it's a fraud scandal that rattled Minnesota, staggering in its scale and in its brazenness. New York Times words, not mine. Quote, federal prosecutors charged dozens of people with felonies, accusing them of stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from a government program meant to keep children fed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Oh yes, Minnesota is a generous state. In fact, they say it right there in the first part of the article. They said, at first, many in the state saw the case as a one-off abuse during a health emergency, but as new schemes targeting the state's generous safety net programs came to light, state and federal officials began to grapple with a jarring reality. They had a problem on their hands because scores of individuals made small fortunes. And guess what? They were all part of Minnesota's, there it is, New York Times words, okay? Somali community. Not mine, New York Times. And they were making small fortunes here by setting up companies that build state agencies for millions of dollars worth of social services that were never provided. Oh my gosh. I mean, this is messed up. This is sick stuff, okay? This is really, really sick stuff. And this is I encourage you to go look at this article, but you're not allowed to say it's sick stuff. No, that's racist to say, for goodness sakes. I mean, just ask the ladies on The View who are desperately trying to stoke this quote unquote civil war that they think that they can get going here in the United States of America. I'm sorry, like people aren't having it. Whoopi, you can keep telling us this. No one's buying it. I realize Bob Iger, Disney, they seemingly want you to just keep attacking the president. It's not good for your ratings. And honestly, I don't really think it's that good for you, given that you are governed by the FCC. I'm all for freedom of speech, but you guys have jumped the shark. You did it a long time ago. There's no semblance of news in your program.
Welcome back. So you know who is attacking Minnesota Governor Tim Walz over Somali Americans in Minnesota who were convicted of defrauding a COVID-era government program for hundreds of millions of dollars. He called the governor a slur for people with intellectual disabilities. And here's what Tim Walz responded.
The seriously blank governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, does nothing either through fear, incompetence, or both.
Using that term is just so damaging. It's hurtful. We have fought 3 decades to get this out of our schools. Kids know better than to use it. But look, this is what Donald Trump has done. He's normalized this type of hateful behavior. And
then he goes on to say, well, he ought to release his MRI. So guess what? Donald Trump did. He released his MRI today, actually. And flying colors. What do you know? Pretty good results out of this little MRI. Here we go. The president released it amid, all of this pressure. So finally he was like, okay, you want to go on about my MRI? The condition that everybody was so focused on, it was a chronic venous insufficiency condition that Trump had faced some claims and concerns about. The condition would occur when veins in the legs cannot effectively return blood back to the heart, leading to symptoms such as swelling, aching, and cramping. The White House says the condition is benign and common. And so the U.S. Navy captain who issued a summary of this report said, as part of President Donald J. Trump's comprehensive executive physical advanced imaging, that would be the MRI, was performed because men in his age group benefit from a thorough evaluation of cardiovascular and abdominal health. The purpose of this imaging is to be preventive, to identify issues earlier. Would have helped if, Biden had done some of that, to identify them early and to, of course, ensure that he's going to be okay. We go on here. Here is the Daily Mail reporting on it, and it says President Trump's abdominal imaging is perfectly normal. The health, no evidence of arterial narrowing, impairing blood vessels or abnormalities. In other words, everything's good. The heart chambers are good, normal in size, etc. Excellent cardiovascular system in excellent health. So this was, Tim's trying to change the subject. He's saying, he's mentally impaired. We need the results of the MRI because he used this term that the kids used to use when I was a kid, okay? Like, I'm sure that they used it when Donald Trump he's that much older than me, was a kid. Well, you can't use this term today. I mean, my kids have told me, and they're definitely not like, the PC police, but they're like, Mom, you can't use that term. You can't use it. You can't use it. So it's been wiped out, as Tim so proudly says. And yet, like, somehow they can call him a dictator. They can say he's akin to Hitler. I mean, I find that pretty offensive and alarming. But here we are with $1 billion in fraud. So you guys can try and twist the subject all you want, but we still know what's up, do we not?